from the studios. It's Election Yard. So we knew we were going to have to do a video on this at some point. We just didn't know when the video was going to be. Turns out the video was today, Friday, May 8th, because the ruling came down from the Virginia Supreme Court today in a 4-3 decision. They threw out the referendum that was just held in late April in Virginia. Now, you may recall, we'll put the results on the screen from that. You may recall that in late April, Virginia had a referendum to decide whether or not they were going to gerrymander the maps, and the voters approved it. And you saw that over 3 million Virginians voted in this April referendum. And the Virginia Supreme Court, what had happened was there were court cases that were coming up through the county courts that ended up with the Supreme Court. And Republicans were suing out in the western part of the state, out in Tazewell County, to block the referendum first from happening, and then after it passed from being implemented. And of course, the conservative judges out there agreed, but it was all going to end up at the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court had done with the earlier litigation, with the litigation that got to the Supreme Court prior to the referendum, the Supreme Court of Virginia had said, we're going to let the referendum happen and then we'll make a decision on it. And then the Monday after the referendum, the Virginia Supreme Court held oral arguments, and there were some Democratic or left-leaning people that listened to these arguments and weren't feeling too great about it. And as it turned out today, in a 4-3 decision, the Virginia Supreme Court just threw out the referendum entirely. We'll talk about what this all means. Let's talk first about what it means in Virginia. And I personally, being here in Virginia, having followed this since the beginning, I knew that the Virginia Supreme Court leaned in a more conservative way. But at the end of the day, I didn't actually think that they had the balls to go through with this. The fact that the referendum did pass, turnout was, all things considered, pretty good, considering it was in the middle of spring. It was a very off-cycle election. I didn't think that they would actually have the guts to throw out a referendum that passed, but they did. So there won't be a 10-1 map in Virginia, at least not now. So for 2026, unless there's some other legal maneuvering that I'm not aware of, you're going back to the 6-5 map, which is 6-5 in favor of Democrats. But don't assume that just because we go back to the old map that Virginia is going to elect 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. So set the stage, big picture, national environment. It's pro-Democratic right now. It just is. The Republicans are not going to flip any seats in Virginia this year. They are not going to win the 7th district with Vindman. They are not going to flip the 10th district in Northern Virginia. And the others are pretty safe seats. So they're not going to flip any seats in Virginia. But the Democrats could flip a few seats in Virginia. So, for example, Hampton Roads, Virginia's 2nd district, Jen Kiggins. She was in trouble before this. Had the map been upheld, she would have been in even bigger trouble. As it stands right now, I think I still wouldn't want to be her. I think that Elaine Luria still has a very good chance of knocking her off in this political environment. So Democrats still have a very good chance, I think, of flipping the 2nd. Then the 1st district, which is definitely redder than the 2nd district. You've got Rob Whitman, the incumbent Republican. It's definitely possible that the Democrats will win it. I'm not sure yet that it's likely. It might be like a tilt Republican sort of situation. But Democrats definitely do have a chance there too. So it could still end up 7-4 or 8-3, but it won't be 10-1. So this has national implications as well. The national implications of this are probably not as extensive as, like, for example, the Supreme Court throwing out the Voting Rights Act, that section. And states, like in Louisiana, you literally had a state that postponed an election so that they could redraw the maps. Like literally early voting was going to start in a couple of days. And they just postponed the election and say, no, we got to redistrict. And other states, like Alabama was just doing it today. Tennessee was just doing it. Other states are going to do that. They're going to just try to blink out as many Democratic seats in their big cities as they possibly can. So combine that with Virginia, instead of it being +4 Democratic, it might only be like +1 or maybe +2. Those things are going to potentially add up. There are going to be other states in the South that don't do this until next time. But where we are, the redistricting war in America, it's raging on. And I think the net result of all of this is that it is going to continue to intensify. It's just going to continue. And Republicans, if not this cycle, then definitely for the 2028 cycle, are going to try to snuff out as many Democratic seats as they can in their states. But in Democratic-led states like Virginia, you had a constitutional referendum years ago for fair districting. There are other Democratic states, like California did, and they had their referendum, and that passed to temporarily set it aside. There are Democratic states that painted themselves into a corner in this situation, saying, well, we're going to have fair maps in our state. We're going to have independent redistricting commissions, all that. And now we're in a situation where this started in 2025 and now it carries over into 2026. Republicans are saying, well, screw that. We're going to draw as many Republican seats in our states as we possibly can. And some states resisted that, like Indiana, but you saw what happened in the primaries there. You can bet in 2028, Indiana will try again to redistrict, and they will probably succeed. But here's the thing. As you know, Republicans in all these states where they redistricted, whether it's Texas or Florida or Tennessee or whatever, the public didn't get a say. In Virginia, the public did get a say. But there are people out there right now who feel like, in this Commonwealth where I sit right now, like 4 people just decided the outcome of an election, essentially. So if you're out there feeling, well, if they were just going to throw it out, why didn't you do it before the referendum? Because I guess the optics of this are terrible. Aside from the constitutional, election fairness, all the other considerations that come into it, the optics of this are not good. Undeniably, the optics of this are not good. That Virginia had an election, and now a court has literally thrown out the election in its entirety. So you can spin that however you want, but the optics of it are not good. So again, on the Virginia level, I still think the Democrats are going to make gains in the state. They're just not going to make as many as they were going to before. And you know what? They could have probably used those extra 2 or 3 seats, seeing, for example, what Louisiana is trying to do, what Tennessee is trying to do, what Alabama is trying to do, what Florida just did. You know, and they're not going to walk back on this. In fact, they're going to go as hard as they can. But you also got to remember too that states that redistrict a little too much, there's always the possibility of what we call a dummy mander, which means that you gerrymandered the map to hell so much and you diluted your own district so much that if there's a wave election going the other way, that you could potentially lose more seats than you otherwise would have. So we would have to really dig into the map, and we would really have to get a sense for the numbers. I have seen some generic polling nationwide that suggests the Democrats could be up anywhere from 6 to 10 points nationally, which, you know, we'll have to see how it is 6 months from now when it actually matters. But there's still a lot going on in this situation. This definitely hurts the Democrats trying to take back the House. It certainly does not end the Democrats' chances of taking back the House. Because if it was going to come down to those 2 or 3 seats in what could potentially be a wave election, then things probably weren't going to go their way anyway. I would be more concerned about the changes because of the Voting Rights Act and all of the ripple effects that that's going to have. But, you've had 2 court cases in a week where the courts have made it really easy for some to gerrymander, but not so easy for others. So you can do with that information what you will. But this is just generally speaking how it affects Virginia. And again, I do think at the end of the day, the Democrats do still have a chance at picking up some seats. The other question is Virginia going to try again? Because remember, Virginia has its legislative elections next year in 2027. In this Commonwealth, we vote off year. So next year, the whole House of Delegates and the state Senate are going to be up. And of course, Abigail Spanberger will still be governor by then. So the question is, do they try again? I'd be pretty surprised if they don't, especially if it ends up being a good Democratic year in 2026. I'd be pretty surprised if they don't. But, we'll see what happens. And we're just going to continue to track what's going on with the House because it seems like the House situation, it changes pretty much every day. So stick around. We'll be following all of these developments because there's just something new coming up all the time. Here at Election Yard, like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. We'll see you soon.